Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Administrator. Nice to see you again. It's always nice to see you.
You too.
I'm having a hard time knowing where to begin because I have so many issues, but I think I'll start with the waters of the U.S. Rule,
Okay.
because I think it's especially relevant to the budgets, considering the appropriations. We've provided some guidance, I think, in the most recent one. Do you regret not utilizing a small business advocacy review panel, and realizing that you share this with the Corps of Engineers, but
Yeah.
was that a mistake to not do a RFA?
No, I don't think so, because we actually have done a tremendous amount of outreach to small businesses looking at this rule, and I think we have the comments we need to have a successful final rule.
But the law requires an RFA, does it not? Which you
Say
did
that
not. But the law requires you to have done an RFA, which you
Actually,
did not do.
we went through the process of looking at whether or not we needed to stand up what we call a SABRIFA panel. We consulted with OMB, that is a final decision maker on this, and they both agreed that we had done the necessary outreach.
So have you responded then to the SBA's Office of Advocacy when they of course disagree with your certification that it had an insignificant enough impact on small entities?
I have
responded?
not directly spoken to them, but certainly we've had interagency discussions on this. It's important to remember that the Clean Water Rule is a jurisdictional rule. It doesn't result in automatic permit decisions. It says that there are certain waters that need to be protected for drinking water and other reasons, and that the permit decisions themselves are what actually will be the result of the impact and the further discussion.
But I think that the rule, as I understand it, presumes to narrow the jurisdiction, but the SBA Office of Advocacy concludes that it does in fact broaden it, that in fact the economic analysis doesn't sync with, I guess, your analysis, or EPA and the Corps' analysis. And I have to admit, when it gets to the issue of the lack of clarity, which the courts have stated, in the definition of what navigable waters is, I understand that should be clarified. But it seems to me, as I look at the 7 categories in the rule, the definition gets cloudier, not more specific, in my view. And that, in fact, if we'd end somewhere after like 3 out of the 7, that would be clear too, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be just as clear to say navigable waters are waters that are navigable for interstate commerce, and leave it at that? Why wouldn't that be clear?
Yeah, actually, the area that lacks clarity right now is not the issue of navigable waters. The Supreme Court actually spoke very definitively that navigable waters need to be looked at in a way that isn't the traditional definition. We haven't been looking at navigable waters the same way. It's a recognition that navigable waters, in their ability to provide the functions that we look for, are really severely impacted by the waters that flow into them. So the challenge we tried to face in the Clean Water Rule was to take a look at how do we identify those rivers, streams, tributaries, wetlands that feed into those navigable waters that we need to understand and protect, so that they won't degrade those waters that are so necessary.
Well, you've just used some new terms, new at least in this rule, that weren't part of the previous one. And I'd add neighboring, riparian,
That's correct.
Floodplain,
Yes.
in addition to. That is adding, not restricting jurisdiction, in my view. It looks to me like you're reaching for more power as opposed to further defining. And I just am concerned that that's not the role of the EPA, but rather the role of Congress.
I appreciate your asking that. I think we are actually looking at that as a way to be clearer and to narrow this, because there's so much uncertainty that there are more case-by-case decisions being made than need to be made. Mm-hmm. So we are trying to provide more clarity, but we also know there's a lot of questions in terms of how people were reading the rule, whether we were clear in our intent and clear in the language, and we'll work through those issues moving forward so the final rule addresses some of those uncertainties.
Well, given the little time I have left, I'm just going to make a couple of comments. One about, I hope that the FERC, that the FERC technical conferences are going well, and that you're paying close attention to those as it relates to the Clean Power Rule.
Actually, Gina McCabe, my assistant administrator in the EPA program, has attended those, and we think they're excellent opportunities for us to understand what the energy world is doing.
I think that type of consultation earlier in the process would have been better, but I'm glad to see it's happening now. With regard to Mr. Sarbanes' comments about the EPA being more in sync with the growing population, if you will, or something to that effect, I would just want to state that the absence of Congress acting on, say, cap and trade, or choosing to not pass cap and trade, should not be viewed as neutrality by the people's house or by the people's representatives, and somehow a license, therefore, to go ahead and catch up to the public, if you will. Because if public support is increasing for whether it's climate action plan or clean power rule, I would also submit to you that the public is well ahead of the EPA and more in line with the Congress with regard to, for example, the Keystone XL pipeline, which so far the only agency that has even said anything remotely negative has been the EPA. And by the way, it wasn't all that negative.
Thank you.
Referring to the that we have to now consider the lower price of oil, but I would just want to remind people that the price of oil was roughly what it is today when TransCanada applied for the Keystone XL pipeline, and I'm over time. Thank you again.
Thank you. This time I recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. McCarthy, for being here. And I think